All right, so yesterday we ended talking about due process. We were talking about how, again, when it comes to citizens in the United States, we all need to have the same opportunities, the same rights, liberties, and protection. Let's face it, right? So, where did this stem from, the 14th Amendment? When did this come about? They call them these types of amendments because it happened after a war that almost broke us apart. What war was this, Azara? The Civil War, good job. And this amendment here was to make sure that free black men and women, right? But at the time, men, right? They had the opportunity of the same rights and privileges as everybody else. And that the states acknowledge it, right? Because you think about it, the southern states especially, right? They were going down this line of the Jim Crow laws to have segregation, this separate but equal idea. All reality was not equal, right? But when you think about how this is changing the United States and developing this due process, viewpoints, and making sure people have the same liberties and opportunities as others. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this today, moving into many, even some of the challenges that we see today, which we just kind of mentioned with President Trump and deporting this man here to an El Salvadorian prison and see where this kind of leads. It's still up in the air. Don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I guess at the snap of his finger, President Trump, he could get this guy back if he needed and go through the process, judicial process, which would probably be good, but again, we'll see where it goes. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about right to equality. Three tests are used in court. It's number one, rational basis test. So I'm going to just talk about it. There's other slides that you guys can look at then to um, to make a little bit more sense. So I have an example listed to each and every principle here. So the rational basis test, this is the idea that allows a government to restrict individuals' rights so long as there is any conceivable legitimate basis for doing so. So, in other words, when you think about certain religions around the world, well, some of them have different principles, different viewpoints that could really affect some people, right? Could really harm some of the people's direction and values and actually go against others. So I know we mentioned about some religions that kind of just stem off in directions that just doesn't seem right, or maybe could cause harm to certain people or other groups. And in this case, which the example I listed, I'll just go back to the slide then for you guys so that we have an idea where we're at. This last one here. So, in other words, so the rational basis test is just kind of determining based off of rationality, right? Even though certain religions, well, with the free exercise clause, we still need a value of religious beliefs and ideologies and values. But at the same time, maybe if they cross the line, we can maybe create a law to prevent certain actions from harming people or others. So, good example a lot of people bring up is how maybe a religion still does sacrifices or something like that, maybe animal sacrifices. And a way to kind of go around this religious belief and ideology is to create a law. Hey, we need to prevent, these types of sacrifices in public, right? Let's say in public parks or something like that. So you're preventing the religion from practicing these harmful and damaging practices without actually saying that the religion is no longer welcome here. Does that make sense? A similar thing can go with polygamy. You guys know what polygamy is? What does that mean, Zara?
Isn't it when someone is married multiple people?
Yeah, good job, right? So here in the United States, we practice monogamy, which is you're married to one other person, right? Mono means one. Mono, mono, I'm sure you guys heard of that before. Poly means multiple. So in other words, certain religions that they embrace marriages to multiple people, right? We have a law that says you can't do that. So it's not like we're targeting the religion, but we're saying, hey, we don't, here in the United States, we don't welcome this type of relationship, right? You can practice your other things, but this, maybe not so much. Okay. On that? Yeah. You don't have one. Well, let me see here, actually. No, I don't. Yeah. I'll email one.
Alright.
I don't know when it'll be done, in the lesson here, so,
Alright, thank you.
yeah. All right, another example here, rational basis. The example I got here is actually pretty good too, when you think about age when it comes to driving. 16 years old, pretty darn good idea, I guess, but at the same time, when it comes to maybe the drinking age, because our minds need to develop a little bit more. Maybe kind of push that back a little bit, just because of responsibility, because of experience, and just understanding a little bit more about how maybe certain practices, values, morals, so on and so forth. And I know we talked a little bit about that as an example from yesterday, is that when it comes with experience and age, maybe you get a little bit more of a break with responsibility of certain things. Right? I think tobacco now, if you want to go to the grocery store or the gas station or something to buy tobacco, you need 21. It used to be 18, they just bumped it back a little bit. So you can kind of see how still we're trying to manage appropriate age. Which is, sorry, you brought up yesterday, good point. It's like, hey, they can actually draft me into the military here, but I can't go to the bar to have a drink. What? Are you kidding me? It's like, well, that's a good point. It's a really good point. But again, there's a common saying, you don't give a 16-year-old the keys and a whiskey bottle, because we all know how that's gonna end, right? So it's one of those things where, again, you kind of understand with age, the appropriate responsibilities that maybe are given to someone at that age. All right, what we're looking at again here, a strict scrutiny test. So the strict scrutiny test is pretty much just based off of, it's a form of judicial review that courts in the United States use to determine the constitutionality of government action that burdens a fundamental right or involves a suspect clarification. So for this example here, when you're looking at the, I just kind of gave it away with the treatment of, let's say, animals and sacrifices or anything that when it comes to religion, a way to try to understand how maybe we can limit someone's behaviors or rights and privileges. If they're doing damn things like this, well, we need to try to create a law or policy to prevent that from continuing. But this could really damage the community, damage people's practices, their beliefs, and their well-being. So, yeah, when it comes to due process, you want to allow that people have the same, obviously the same rights to embrace themselves the way they want. But if it's harming other people, then this could cause some issues, cause some concerns. All right, when you look at politics today, all right, a lot of conservative Republicans look at, again, when it comes to some of these drag shows that they're, doing within libraries or schools, or saying, hey, around kids, maybe not appropriate, right? Maybe some of these things that we're seeing in some of these grade schools, when it talks about sex and talks about relationships and talk about, some of these ideas that even as an adult are kind of hard for people to put their minds around, maybe in a school isn't appropriate. So this is another example that you can maybe relate it to today, where a lot of people are having conversations and discussions about it, right? So again, that's just an example, not to go off on a limb here, but in today's world, a lot of people look at it and say, that's just kind of understanding when it comes to the due process. All right, last thing here is the substantial relationship test. And the example I have here is pretty cut and dry. Is when you're looking at a group of people based on gender, race, ethnicity. We talked about even yesterday, people that might have a disability. When it comes to certain opportunities, when it comes to certain positions, or maybe serving in the military. Obviously, it's suited for a certain demand. All right, so when we talk about firefighters, when we talk about the military, who can be drafted into it, right? It's not restricting people off of gender or sex, but at the same time, when it comes to the physical demands for a position or a job, maybe we can't just deny someone the rights for a job or position within the military based off of their sex and gender. But if they don't reach the physical demands, right? Then they don't reach the physical demands. So in other words, a fitness test like this would be appropriate for, let's say, people that are looking to join the military or becoming a firefighter. And that is a way to try to test people to see if they're suited for the job. So again, it's not discriminating anybody based off their sex or gender, or maybe if they have a disability. But if a fire is burning, we need if someone, let's say, is 250 pounds and needs to be carried out of a burning building. Charlotte, no offense, but I'm not gonna ask you to go get them, okay? So it's one of those things where you kind of look at it and make common sense, right? The common sense decision here for who would be suited for the job. Does that make sense, guys? All right, but at the same time, when you look at, let's say, women and sports, and that's a big thing here today when it comes to maybe transgender, males and the females in sports. A lot of times you can look at it and say, hey, this is kind of cut and dry, right? We can't have this 6'2", 220 pound, well, transgender woman, so who was once a man, now a woman, competing in, let's say, combative sports against women, right? It would not go over well. So you're seeing a lot of topics of debate today in that regard, right? Just looking at it, just understanding the physical differences, right? Biological differences. It's not fair whatsoever, right? It's not to try to deny them the right or opportunity, but right, someone could get seriously hurt, especially if it's, let's say, martial arts or boxing, right? Not cut and dry. All right, looking at, we're good here. We talked a lot about this. It's just understanding the Bill of Rights incorporates into all the states and localities. When we mentioned about federalism, it's not just one specific area, but all the states, right? All these human rights, all these liberties, all these freedoms are designed and stretched over the whole country, not just the select few states or areas. And that the states can't restrict that. We already talked about Gitlow versus New York when it comes to freedom of speech and assembly, right? And how his viewpoints when it comes to socialism, right? This was about the anarchy clause within New York's policy. They wanted to make sure to prevent the radical views and ideologies of politics in the state of New York, and it restricted freedom of speech. But during the time of the Red Scare, a lot of people, even many judicial reviewers, were looking at this and saying, hey, this can't be spread, this can't be talked about, this can't be discussed. Right? If this happens, we're not gonna have much of the country left because they're acting and promoting rebellion violently against the government. So, yeah, right. In any case, this freedom of speech is protected, but depending on the situation, depending on if you're trying to incite violence, then it could be restricted. All right, equal protection cases. This is probably one of the most important ones if you guys are ever taking any education courses in college. They talk about Brown versus Board of Education all the time. And this one is an important one because when you think about the Jim Crow laws, segregation in the South, right? This is making sure that the institutions, when it comes to education, when it comes to public education in the South, this desegregated schools. Right, so again, leading up until 1954, there are schools for Black Americans, so African Americans, and there are schools for white Americans in the South. Right, pretty much every southern state had a separate public school for people of race. Okay, now what was the decision that came up? It says separate but equal, right? That was the whole idea of segregation when it came to Jim Crow and Plessy versus Ferguson. But we all know that it's not equal. So separate educational facilities, they're inherently unequal. So if you're separating them for whatever reason, I mean, obviously in this case here for race, right? Obviously it's not going to be equal. And when you look at the facilities, right, back in the day here, if you see pictures or understanding firsthand accounts, right, the resources, the funding for the school, just the layout of the school. A lot of the African American public schools were falling apart, right? They didn't have any, a lot of times didn't have any they didn't have any plumbing, the water lines were burst and broken. When you think about some of the grade schools, the recess, when it comes to some of the playground equipment, all falling apart, right? And textbooks, they're all out of date, if they even had any, okay? So this court case is huge when it comes to desegregation. Right, when it comes to ending segregation here in the public school facilities, and this will later branch in the civil rights movement even more. Okay. So not followed in southern states until forced by federal troops. So remember JFK, Governor Wallace, remember when we talked about that? Show you guys a video. I think I even showed you the part of Forrest Gump when they discussed it, right? How JFK said, hey, open up. and he was forced to in 1963. So 54 to 63, 9 years. So yeah, in certain states, it takes a long time. All right, nonviolent protests. So when it comes to certain demands, when they're not met, right, obviously violently protesting, not acceptable. Right, if you are looking to cause harm or damage or violently overthrowing the government or toppling certain issues or certain things based off of demands and viewpoints, that's probably not the way to go about it. Definitely not. Right? If you want to try to express your opinion, you want to do it nonviolently. You want to do it in a peaceful manner. Right? When you think about the civil rights movements with Martin Luther King Jr., he advocated for peaceful protests. And I'm sure you guys heard of many of them. So boycotts. So you're refusing to buy goods and services, goods or services from a certain company or business, or I don't know, public transportation based off of, let's say, the state or the city, I mean, municipalities use on race or let's say gender movements. So boycotts. I'm sure you guys remember the Montgomery bus boycotts. Talk a little bit about it. Yeah. Okay. Rosa Parks. Yeah. Okay. Hunger strikes, okay, a lot of times this gets pretty wild, some of the pictures, some of the accounts of this, but the hunger strikes, refusing to eat anything in order to get attention for your cause. All right, real quick, back to boycotts. Right now, I guess you could say there's somewhat of a boycott for certain groups of people against Tesla. Right, I'm sure you guys maybe saw some of the damages, some of the violence against that. That's not right to do. Right, if you don't want to purchase or buy, let's say, a car, a Tesla car, which, I mean, they're pretty pricey anyhow, huh? But you don't want to buy it, fine. That's a means of protest or boycott, I guess. You don't want to buy their services, or if you don't want to buy the product, but damaging them and trying to vandalize them, that's not the way to go about it. I'm sure you guys remember too, the Bud Light boycotts. Oh, I mean, so many people were up in arms about it, just based off of some of the movements with the LGBTQ community, and many people were saying, hey, we're not for it. And you actually had some of these, even famed artists destroying it with guns. Kid Rock, you guys saw a video about that. He was lighting up with his machine guns. But guess who's drinking Bud Light again? Kid Rock. So, I mean, I guess they're making a comeback, but those are examples of boycotts. Okay, maybe today's, examples of today's world. Petition, so writing a letter to ask government or company to change a policy. So based on the certain matter here, you might ask a politician to change a policy on, let's say, voting rights, okay? Or when it comes to maybe taxation, right? You see that a lot, right? People or requesting a government official to change a certain matter of policy based on the public's view on these decisions. Marches and demonstrations. So the March on Washington, MLK Jr., that's a great example, right? When it comes to setting a viewpoint and establishing a movement of people to an area in order to express an idea of how things can maybe change or be better for a group of people. Strikes, I'm sure you guys know strikes, especially outside of businesses or corporations. If the workers aren't receiving proper pay, compensation, benefits, they're gonna go on strike. If you don't have the workers, well, production stops. So the company is gonna lose money until they reach the demand here or the needs of the workers. So strikes, another good example of nonviolent protest. All right, and finally sit-ins. Okay, you guys ever hear of the Greensboro sit-ins, North Carolina? No, Mr. Schutz's class, you guys get to the civil rights movement? No? Right, okay. So the sit-ins is a good example here too, is that in North Carolina during the Jim Crow laws, during, before the civil rights movement here, many African Americans sat at this, it was kind of like an ice cream shop at a restaurant. They were sitting there waiting to be served. Well, they sat there for a long time. Right when the business opened up, kind of like mid-morning or so, and then all the way to the end of the day. But here's where the trouble started. Some of the white Americans in North Carolina, as they came in, were racially motivated, obviously. They wanted to try to remove these African Americans from their seats. And hey, you've been sitting here all day, you're not getting served, get out of here, right? You're not welcome here. So what they started to do is, well, they go and get served, they get their soft drink, their ice cream, and they dump it all over these people that were sitting in the African Americans, demanding service. They never got it. So there's pictures, videos of this. Here's just one of them. Obviously, there's no ice cream or soda dumped all over them, but you look up the images, it's pretty sad to see. Anyway, that's a form of protest, though, to show, hey, we're not welcome here, right? We're not getting served. And you can see how people behind us are treating us like we're animals. So, again, you can imagine just how kind of sad that is, but that's a form of nonviolent protest. All right, other forms of discrimination, when you think of affirmative action, so there's terms that go out there today when it comes to hiring people within a job, or it comes to service or even school, right? When you're getting invited or welcomed, accepted into colleges, they go based off a lot of times, certain colleges off of affirmative action, right? Or the diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure you guys heard that before, DEI, right? No, okay. But anyway, affirmative action, DEI, they kind of go together. The idea is that these minority groups in the United States, they should receive the same opportunities as white Americans, as the majority, okay? And how they may have been mistreated over the times here in the United States. This is an opportunity for minority groups to receive, let's say, an education or a position in a company or business based off of race or ethnicity, okay? Or gender, right? Or gender. So a lot of times back in the day here, they go by a quota system. So for every 100 workers, 16 of them have to be from, let's say, a different race, ethnicity, or sex. So this is a way, again, to try to make sure you have more of a diverse working group or a diverse college. Does that make sense? On paper, okay, yeah, sure. But when it comes down to it, which I'll show on the next slide, when it comes to the productivity of, let's say, a business or let's say a school here, when it comes to educational merit, right? So meaning their experience, their background, their accomplishments, right? You can't really restrict people based off of race, sex, or gender. In other words, that's racist, so as it is, because you might push someone away that is overqualified for a position, or let's say a school, just because they don't fit the idea of, let's say, being a part or being a minority. So, in other words, causes a lot of hardships. Today, we're seeing a lot of push for meritocracy. Again, meaning if you're experienced, you have the background, it doesn't matter what race, gender, or sex you are, as long as you have the experience and the accolades, the accomplishments, you'll get hired in the job, or you'll get into that college, okay? And here's a good example. When it comes to University of California, First Bay, this is about a student that was white, and he was receiving, he was trying to get into University of California. So his whole idea was, I got great grades, I was in the top of my class, I'm overqualified to even get into University of California, which University of California is very accoladed, it's very accomplished, prestigious university. He said, I'm qualified for this to get in the university. Anyway, he didn't get in, and the reason for it is because they went by a quota system. He didn't get accepted because they accepted people of other minority groups, either African Americans or Native Americans or Asian Americans, or maybe just women, right, within the college. And guess what? Their grades were not even close to his. So he was upset about it. He's like, wait a minute, I put all the time, all the effort, right? I did well on all these standardized tests. I prepared myself, right? They did not, and they get rewarded for it. Does that make sense to you guys? No, right? So when it comes to meritocracy, right, there is merit to it. Get it? Okay. So there is a reason why we go by. Right? If you're experienced, if you put in the hard work and all the time, then you should benefit from it. Right? It shouldn't be based off of someone's skin color. Right? And now you got people looking at that and saying, hey, you know what, that's kind of racist in a way. You think about it, right? Or looking at it in a different light. The whole idea, the premise behind it, sure, I understand, but right? You're actually kind of preventing people to excel when they do put in the time and have the experience. All right, well, pretty much finishing up here. All right, last thing I want to mention when it comes to constitutional rights, obviously government organizations, well, they have the ability to monitor data that's based on your cell phone, certain apps that you guys go on. They have the ability to look at the information that you post online and what you search. And they're all sold this data to companies to help advertise around you. So you have a certain portfolio based off of what you look at, who you follow, what you like online, what you search, which you think everything's hidden, it's private, it's not, right? In other words, you're kind of the product for some of these businesses. They look at what you are interested in and direct their production around what you desire. A lot of times too, it's kind of freaky whenever you're talking about someone, let's say, and you don't follow them or are friend with them on Facebook. And all of a sudden, people you may know, that person that you're talking smack about shows up on your Facebook. Did that ever happen to you guys? Or Snapchat or Instagram? Happens and it's pretty scary actually. But yeah, they're listening to you. They are, right? Obviously, you can find ways to try to seek more private, let's say, cell phone coverage or when it comes to certain applications or programs like a VPN. You guys know what a VPN is? It's a way to try to disguise your location, so it's harder for someone maybe to track you or to maybe, reach your data or gather your data. Anyway, in other words, it is kind of scary, right? The way the government kind of utilizes these means to advertise, really promote businesses around your user data. But anyway, with security cameras, obviously there's a need for them. There's a reason for them. Sometimes people just create some conspiracy theories around it and get a little too fanatical about it, which, yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. More or less, that's kind of it. But yeah, I mean, we don't watch though. We all know the government, they're not going to give up power. So the more we give them, the more they're going to want. Anyway, is there any questions? Due process? Okay. So your assignment, I have this set for next Friday. You can work with another partner. Okay. Next week, like I said, since we finish up the chapter, we will have our test next week at some point. Okay. I'm going to talk more about that here on Monday, but we will have our presentations on Friday for your video assignment. It only has to be 2 to 5 minutes. Shouldn't take you too long. All right. Cool.